person on Park Avenue or online at stbarts.org. It's my joy and delight to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And this June 2nd is our Children, Youth, and Families Sunday. So our topic today is on the spirituality of our young people. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, the Reverend Zach Niane, who oversees all of our Children, Youth, and Family ministry, to introduce our special guest.
Thanks so much, Peter. Today's guest, who I'm so honored to introduce, is Lisa Miller, PhD. Lisa is professor in the clinical psychology program up the road at Columbia University Teachers College, where she founded the Spirituality, Mind, and Body Institute, the first Ivy League graduate program in spirituality and psychology. A graduate of Yale and the University of Pennsylvania, she is the author of a number of books, including the New York Times bestsellers, The Awakened Brain, and The Spiritual Child. And speaking of The Spiritual Child, we have complimentary copies of that book for each of you here in the forum today, one per family, as well as any of you who may be joining us online. You can email Peter to have a copy sent to you, and we'll have more instructions about that in a bit. So at this time, if you would join me in welcoming Dr. Lisa Miller.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Not yet. Okay. Let's try this. Good morning. Is that a little better? Good. Great. I'm so delighted to join you. Thank you so much, Zach and Peter. Thank you for what you're doing here in the heartbeat of the city of New York. You can literally feel the heartbeat of New York right here in this area. And you are ambassadors. You are spiritual ambassadors as you come here in community and go forth. So I'm very grateful to be in deep discussion with you. I'm sharing with you today my work and the work across the field in clinical science on a field that really 20, 25 years ago didn't even exist. In the late 90s and early 2000s, there were many people who said, you know, I am a deeply spiritual and religious person. I know this to be true in my heart, and I know it to be true irrespective of what science has addressed or not addressed, right? And then there were those people who would say, I am a hard-boiled scientist, I am very rigorous, I only take to be true that which is shown by science. What is this religion and spirituality stuff? But it turns out that, of course, the two do go very comfortably hand in hand. That science is a lens, it is only a lens, and whether that lens is a microscope or a telescope, or an MRI study, or a genotyping study, we can point that lens of science at a broad host of questions, including the nature and the impact of lived spiritual life onto the rest of our lives. And so I join you both as a scientist and as a religious person, and will share with you that I view science as a form of witness, that we can stand up one by one and hear of who I call God in our lives and bear witness in testimony, and we can listen to the chorus of sacred human experience as told through the voice of a study sample. Science is a form of witness in my eyes, and so in that frame I share with you what we now have as 2 decades of very strong peer-reviewed science that bears witness to the extraordinary impact of spiritual and religious life onto the rest of our lives. And perhaps by the end of our discussion, you'll have seen mirrored that which you already known, but elevated and celebrated, that there's nowhere in the world more important to be than where you are here now in a spiritual community. So what is the science and what does it say? Well, first of all, spirituality, religion, what's the difference, right? Well, I will say that for many, many, many people in our community, it's not entirely clear, and there's many ways of thinking about this. But through the lens of a clinical scientist, we can look through the lens of a twin study and determine the extent to which any important human capacity is inborn versus cultivated by our environment. And it turns out that religion, our beautiful faith traditions, whether I am Episcopalian or Hindu or Jewish or Muslim, whatever my religion might be, is a gift. I choose the community and immerse myself in text, in prayer, in ceremony, in ritual. I might learn of my faith tradition from my parents and grandparents. Religion is a gift. It is environmentally transmitted through the lens of science. And what it cultivates is our deep natural spiritual awareness, because spirituality is innate. Every single one of us on earth, 7.2 billion people, all are born naturally spiritual beings. As we're physical and have 2 eyes and a nose, as we have a cognitive mind, we are born too with a natural seat of spiritual awareness, and more specifically, the capacity to be in a transcendent relationship with our higher power, who I call God. And whether our word is God or Jesus or Hashem or Allah, we are all born with a deep inborn capacity for spiritual awareness in the form of a transcendent relationship. And just as we are born to be in relationship, again, to who I call God, you have your word, we too are born to feel that same relational spirituality and our love for one another. And because this is an innate capacity, it has a home in the brain. We published this in JAMA Psychiatry in 2014. It was the first of 10 years of articles on the neural correlates of our natural spiritual awareness. And what you see here in broad regions in red are regions of cortical thickness, strength in people with a sustained spiritual life. And these are regions, the parietal, precuneus, and occipital, of deep reflection, perception, orientation. This is our lens for living. And as an analogy, the more we strengthen the muscle, the stronger it is. These rich areas of cortical thickness allow us to literally see into life on spiritual bedrock. Now, while this capacity is in each and every one of us, 7.2 brains built and ready to receive and perceive transcendent relationship, it is 1/3 innate, it's in all of us, but it is 2/3 environmentally formed, which means that our faith traditions cultivate our natural awakened brain. Our faith traditions, through learning prayer, how to connect to God, through praying together and hosting sacred presence, through a roadmap of the sacred reality and a language, and all that is brought cultivates our natural spiritual awareness to elevate and celebrate where you are right now, today, here at St. Bart. So, what does this have to do with our youth? Well, you may recall about 40 years ago, there was a movement to quiet religious life in the public square, right? Take down the Christmas trees, take down the Hanukkah menorahs, and people started whispering by the water cooler about their spiritual and religious life. And with that came a silencing, because while it was intended probably to be inclusive, it turned out to be radically exclusive of spiritual and religious life. And we became a spiritually non-conversant society. 40 years of an ice age. 40 years is long enough for someone to grow up, have a child who grows up and is here now as a Gen Z. Right? I have 3 Gen Zs. Right? And the air and water of our culture has shifted. So the science I'm going to share with you is a science that both is a statement of our current challenge, but it is also an empirically grounded walkway for hope. Because with, as a statement of the problem, the decline in family faith tradition and personal spiritual life has been an ascension of the diseases of despair, addiction, depression, and even suicide. I spoke just a couple days ago at the UN. What is the #1 killer of youth right now? Gen Z. It is not cancer. The #1 killer of youth right now is not COVID or cancer. It is suicide. the diseases of despair. The rate of death by suicide rivals the rate of death by auto accident as the #1 killer of youth. How did we get here? How did we get here? There's been a desanctification of the public square. So I'll share with you, when my 3 Gen Zs were in high school, they're now in college, the little one, who was just at the end of middle school, came running up to me, and she had her cell phone, and she said, Mommy, 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 come here. This girl is going to kill herself on social media. And there it was. I can't take it anymore. I've been in pain for 2 months. I'm ending my life. So what might you have thought would be the response on social media to this call for help? Tell your parents? Get help? Treatment can help you? No. You go, girl. No one can tell you what to do. It's your life. It's your choice. It's your choice, and it's not worth it. That is a desanctification of life. That is why a strong spiritual and religious core is ever more important. Through prayer, through meditation, through coming together, through you as an ambassador, a torchbearer for your child and grandchild. You are the conduit. There's no love in the world like the love of a grandparent or a parent as the golden chariot through which is shared the great love of God in us, through us, and around us. We are ambassadors through the lens of science. Because what has traditionally looked like, oh, she is depressed, he is addicted, she is at risk for suicide, when we look at the fact that 60% of Gen Z faces a disease of despair, we must look at the air and water, the desanctification of life. And how can that change? Because you are an ambassador. And because we, as we head out into the world, can co-create our culture another way. Someone made it this way, and we can make it another way. So how do we help? And what does the science say? And why am I so full of hope in the light of this tidal wave? Because any innate capacity, which body, mind, and soul is our capacity to be in a receptive perception of God, right? To receive a transcendent relationship. This innate capacity has a growth spurt, and you may remember it well in your own path. There are 3 bridges in life, hardwired, that note an acceleration of our spiritual life. It often starts with a hunger. It can start with an existential longing, a quest. What is my meaning? What is my purpose at the first bridge in emerging adulthood and late adolescence? And I don't mean, do I want to be, in business or a nurse or a teacher? I mean, what is my purpose on earth? What is my calling? And the hunger of the heart for love and transcendence comes together in this phase of spiritual individuation, spiritual emergence. We see this all around the world: confirmation, bar and bat mitzvah, the inipi, the sweat lodge, with physical coming of age, 15, 18 years old, 20, 22. There's a surge. We chart this through science in longitudinal twin studies, and we see a 50% increase in the heritable contribution, which means from the inside out, this hunger for spiritual emergence. We can show up as ambassadors and walk by the side of our teens. We can show up as spiritual guides. They often don't want to hear how it is or be told what to do. You may have noticed. But when we speak in the first person, I remember when I was feeling real despair. I remember when I was 19 and didn't know my purpose. I remember when I'd felt God's presence all my life and went to college, and no one said a peep about God in college, and I really started to worry if God existed. I remember when. Your story is riveting. It is absolutely riveting. And your way, when you talk of your spiritual path, open the window and walk the walk. You are the torchbearer. When the spiritual core is supported, and support is through you, and support, you're not alone, is through the we, is through the us. Because prayer in a community, a youth group, a youth event, there's many ways to come together. There's many ways to come together. But when we come together on sacred ground, we see each other in a different way, right? As a soul on earth. When I go to a dinner party, I'm asked, what do you do? What does your partner do? Where do you live? I can feel myself being added up and calculated and measured. When I come here, you look me in the eye. You say, I'm glad to see you. We see each other as a soul on earth, right? It is another way to be known. It is another way to be seen. And as, again, this very same part of our brain through which we are in relationship to God is the very same part of the brain through which we see God's presence in our love for one another. Relational spirituality. And you strengthen the muscle here. Okay, so this means that when we do strengthen the spiritual core, we strengthen our natural birthright for relational spirituality, to be in relationship, a lived relationship to God. I turn to God for guidance in times of difficulty. When I have a tough decision to make, I ask, really, what does God want me to do in prayer, in meditation, in fellowship? When we strengthen the spiritual core, a teenager is at 80% decreased relative risk for addiction, a standard deviation above as compared to below the mean, and a tendency to say, I turn to God for guidance in times of difficulty. 60% less likely to get depressed. Now remember, every teen will have the existential struggle, the developmental depression, through which is actually found a closer relationship to God. But the downward spiral to the potholes is far less likely with major depression when a spiritual response to suffering is cultivated. What God do you ask of me now? You know, I just didn't get into any college. My parents just got divorced. We just ran out of money. The things that happen in our lives, what God do you ask of us now? And in prayer, we don't fall through to the abyss. We're caught. We are loved and held. We are guided. We are never alone. That realization is a spiritual response to suffering. 70% less likely to take dangerous risks. And in a study to the epidemic, a meta-analysis, 2,000 tragically completed suicides and 5,000 matched controls were at 82% decreased relative risk, 4/5 less likely to take our lives when spiritual life is shared, God's presence in the community, fellowship. Now, there's nothing in the clinical or social sciences as profoundly protective against our epidemic of the diseases of despair. There's no greater gift we can give our teens. There's nothing we have. If I told you there were a little pill at the Walgreens, and we could give this to every high schooler in the city of New York, we can send it up to Columbia where I work, and to City, and to NYU, who wouldn't do that? This is 4 times the magnitude, at least, of anything else we have. Why? Because this is a realization of how we are built. We are built as naturally spiritual beings to address the vicissitudes, the small and the huge challenges of life from a foundationally spiritual seat of awareness, a spiritual response to suffering. Am I out of time?
Yep, a few more minutes.
2 minutes? Okay. Okay. So suffering is a knock at the door for an awakening. The very same people with the bright red brains with a strong spiritual life today did not get there easily. It's not that we have happy spiritual people that never have depression and addiction, and then there's us who struggle. And no. Spirituality and despair are a very interwoven path. When we struggle, we're not off our spiritual path. We are on the spiritual path. Struggle is a gateway to spiritual awakening. The people with the bright red brains, the people who right here say, my relationship to God that is strong, my spiritual life that is highly important to me. People who say that with deep heart are 250% more likely to have been depressed in the past 10 years. It is through the gateway of struggle that often we break through to the other side. It can also be through the birth of a child and joy and illumination, but it is often through the gateway of struggle. Despair can be a knock at the door. Despair can be a knock at the door for a spiritual awakening and deepening and growth. This is how we're built. The bridges that are hardwired are emerging adulthood, midlife, No longer what is my meaning and purpose? Am I living my meaning? Am I true to my purpose? What is my spiritual footprint? How am I really affecting the people with whom I work and my family? And then the third bridge, the ascension to elderhood. I just spoke for 200 elders in Virginia. People came up and said, this is the most important work in my life right now, is deep discernment and deep practice of connecting to God, or what their word was. So just as there are 3 hardwired bridges of spiritual struggle and emergence, 3 hardwired bridges of a knock at the door, so that we might inherit the next station of our lives, so too life events, certainly the pandemic and death and despair and struggle and illness, these are all moments of deepening. So we are not made less, we are made more. Okay, I'm going to skip to one last point, which is when we support the spiritual core in our children and teens, it is a setup for the rest of our lives. It is 90% stable. Now, 46% of people change their faith tradition. So my 3 Gen Zs, I don't know what, I'm Jewish, and will they be Jewish? Maybe. But I have 90% certainty that they will have a close relationship to God, which is the seat of everything. That is the most important gift I can possibly hope for my children. Now, think about the good stuff in life, right? Quick review, because I'm out of time. We're naturally spiritual beings. 4 minutes, okay. We are naturally spiritual beings, but this blessing, this gift, is 1/3 innate, 2/3 environmentally formed. By way of comparison, our temperament, whether we're outgoing or more introverted, whether we're laid back or tightly wound, our temperament is half innate, half environmentally formed. We can talk ourselves, okay, I'm an introvert, you gotta walk in and say hi to everyone. Okay, I'm an extrovert, I need a quiet moment, I've gotta take a breath, right? You all are very bright, capable people here in New York. You were born bright, capable people. IQ is 60% inborn. We are naturally spiritual beings, but it is 1/3 innate, which means it is in us, but 2/3 environmentally formed means that you, as ambassadors of spiritual life, as parents and grandparents are tremendously impactful, are the 2/3 embrace. So the setup now lasts a lifetime. Innately spiritual, 2/3 environmentally formed by you and the faith community and the choices that we make externally and internally to cultivate our spiritual core. And when we do, there is nothing as profoundly protective against the diseases of despair, addiction, depression, and even suicide as a strong spiritual core. There's no greater gift we have. The science is all in the spiritual child, and I'm so grateful to St. Bart for giving everybody a copy of The Spiritual Child. You can go on Medline or Google Scholar and look up the original studies. It's all in the reference section. And why do I hammer the science? Because the science mirrors and honors what you've already known. And still it can make system change. The Pentagon used this science, and we went out for 3 years, changed basic training, changed how behavioral health was conducted, a spiritual response to suffering. This science changes schools, changes higher ed, and it changes how communities approach who we really are. Spirit first, spiritual, mind, body. Final word, we want good things for our kids. Grit, optimism, the wonderful character strengths and virtues that give us traction in the world, make us honorable, make us good people. Grit, optimism, forgiveness. Well, it turns out, if I might invite you to think of someone you love who has tremendous commitment and now lots of optimism and good grit, how many people were you thinking of as you think of these folks? Many people say one, because we love all people. But the character strengths and virtues, grit, optimism, meaning, they tend to all load into the same young people, represented there in blue. The kid who just rolls, gets up, and gets on with it, versus the kid who feels kicked in the gut and I want to stay home. Right? How do we help our kid that feels kicked in the gut become a kid who rolls? because character turns out to be a unitive trait. The same person with grit has optimism, and the same person with optimism has commitment and forgiveness. And it turns out that for 80% of young people, character is spiritually embedded. It's actually 85%. And we've replicated this on 250,000 young people. Why? Because spiritually grounded character changes how we see the world. Who am I and who am you? In the marketplace, in a public square silent on spiritual life for 40 years. Who am I? I'm the smartest in my class. Actually, I'm the one having the toughest time. Who am I? I'm the best tennis player, the best soccer player. Actually, I got cut from JV. Who am I? I am my outward parts and pieces. We see each other in a public square minus a spiritual core transactionally. Let's go back to my dinner party. What do you do? What does your partner do? Where do you live, right? Transactionally. But here, in a spiritual home, we see each other transformationally. We don't need to keep up with the Joneses. We walk with the Joneses. So another way to know myself as a child, because of how you look at me, is that I am not that I got into college or didn't get into college. I am not that I got cut from preschool or welcome to preschool. Who am I? I am a child of God. I'm a soul on earth. And when you see me with love, walking with the Joneses, our relationship is not transactional, it is transformational. That is another sense of who I am. And if I'm a soul on earth, you're a soul on earth. And our relationship's about interest and commitment, and on a tough day, forgiveness. That is another way of being, and it of course leads to greater optimism, forgiveness, and the character strengths and virtues. Because even if I'm the very, very, very best, and I went to Bronx Science, and I'm going to Caltech or MIT, and I got there, and I was in the top 2%, and now I'm in the middle? Or wait a minute, I'm not in the middle, I'm in the bottom quarter. Transactional ways of being are very fragile and very brittle. Outside of Palo Alto High School is a guard, because after a cluster of suicides driven by failure, kids threw themselves on the train track. Rye, New York, parents got together, took this science, took themselves, and created a spiritually grounded society. Because we can take back our culture. Parents can say, I'm so glad to see you, to each other's kids. What was the funniest thing that happened today? You know, your mom and I, and your dad and I had a great time laughing before you all came out at that funny thing that happened yesterday in the park. Not, did you win the game? How did the math test go? Where's everybody going next year for college, right? We can take back our culture. And when we do, we have a spiritually grounded world for our children, and it starts here. Thank you. Great.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. At this time, we'll have a time for question and answers. If you would like to complete a question card and give it to one of the ushers, we'll take those. And if you're online, you can submit questions to my colleague, the Reverend Peter Thompson, via email. You can email him at pthompson@stbarts.org. That's PTHOMPSON@STBARTS.org. So we welcome your questions, and if you're arriving late online or in person, we do have complimentary copies of Dr. Miller's book, The Spiritual Child, available to you. You can also email Peter to have one sent to you. But thank you again, Professor Miller. So much of what you said is so deeply resonant with our ethos and culture here at St. Bart's. I love this idea of cultivating transformational relationships over transactional. And I would tell you that as we seek to cultivate community amongst our young people, we really preference environment and community and culture over content. It's been said that faith is caught, not taught. And so rather than trying to cram their heads full of even more knowledge as they're already trying to prepare for all those tests and examinations, we try to look them in the eye and say, welcome, and extend the radical welcome that Christ extends to us.
Well, every bit of science applauds you. Because
Absolutely.
it is indeed in how we walk the walk and talk the walk. as adults and in the communities we create that shapes the spiritual core. Walk the walk, meaning live out spiritual values, right? That we work together. We're going to go down the street and we're going to bring toys to the children at the homeless shelter. We are doing this. Why? As we walk the walk, talk the walk. Because that child and all of us, we're equal. We're all God's children. And God loves us and we love each other. Talk the walk. And that stays with the child forever, forever.
And of course, Jesus in our tradition says that we should all approach God like children, not to be childish, but to be childlike. So,
Yes.
So
Oh, that's so beautiful, because science shares that the child is a naturally spiritual child. You could say they are born a soul on earth. From the lens of clinical science, the child is born a knower. We don't fill the child with spirituality. They come alive as a spiritual being, and we walk with them and guide them and shape that deep spiritual knowing. But we are all, the child is a source already, a knower. Yeah. Beautiful.
Thank you. So you touched on this a little bit, but I'm just curious, for many generations, we've kind of followed the assumption that people might leave the church or spiritual community, religious community after high school graduation. And when they're around my age and start having children, perhaps they'll come back to church. Well, more and more we're seeing not so many people coming back to church, especially in the Episcopal Church, mainline denominations. And so what would be your encouragement and what hope and advice might you give to parents, grandparents out there who aren't seeing their own offspring come back to church and might be feeling some distress around that?
Oh, it's such an important point. Wow. And in the spiritual child, there's a lot of science around this. Okay, first, I had a very dear colleague, Dr. Sunya Luthar, who spent years and years looking at children in deep poverty and found addiction and depression in these children. And one day as a control group said, I'm going to look at kids who are well-fed and well taken care of. I'm going to look at kids who are well-resourced with parents who love them. And she went to highly resourced communities, Dr. Luthar, as a control group, and actually found higher rates of addiction, higher rates of depression in highly resourced communities inside and outside New York, inside and outside San Francisco. And she said, how can that be? How can that be? And she looked under the hood, really very concerned, went to the lunch tables, into the high schools, sat down with the kids, and said, can you tell me, she wanted to know what mattered. What's the cultural tidal wave shaping our kids? Who's really popular here? What do you think is the #1 predictor of popularity in girls in highly resourced communities? A public square that is radically transactional. What's the #1 predictor of popularity in girls? It's weight. Can you imagine? Parts and Pieces. And #2 is Mean Girls, like the musical across the street. In boys, #1 predictor of popularity, substance use. And #2 was not intimacy, but exploitation, notches on the belt. Okay, these are souls on earth, acculturated in a transactional tidal wave. Okay. Higher rates of addiction, higher rates of depression, higher risk for suicide in highly resourced kids. That's a pretty despairing way to live. That makes sense, right? So I teamed up with Dr. Luthar, and I said, wow, well, we know at a national level that a teenager with a strong relationship to God, a faith community, is at 80% decreased relative risk of addiction, 82% less likely to take their life in this epidemic. What are the rates of spirituality in well-resourced communities? And it turned out that while the national rate is 70%, in highly resourced communities, what percent of teens do you think say, I turn to God for guidance, my spiritual life is highly important to me? What percent of teens, what's your hunch? Even lower, 15%, only 15%, less than a quarter of the national rate of teens in highly resourced communities have a close relationship to God. Say, I turn to God for guidance. How do I get my kid into that 15%, and what would that mean? Because those 15% of well-resourced families who have kids who say, yes, spiritual life is important to me. Those kids were inured. They were protected from the otherwise elevated rates. They did not have addiction or despair at the same levels. And when they did, because rain does fall, there was a spiritual response to suffering to prevent the downward spiral and strengthen the seat of spiritual awareness for the next rain or hailstorm. Those 15% had an entirely different life course. How do I get my kid into that 15%? Almost without exception, Zach, the tiny 15% of well-resourced kids who had a strong spiritual life had families that were part of a faith community. There was somewhere else where they went, where they weren't measured on their weight or their use of substance or who they'd been with on TikTok. They were looked at as a soul on earth, as a child of God. They were loved. I'm so glad to see you. I don't care if your dad's on the paper for making $1 million or going to jail. I'm so glad to see you. Come as you are. We love you. Right? And that's real. That stayed. Almost without exception. A few of them were part of Habitat for Humanity. But everyone, most of them were here in a house of worship. And it didn't have to be every day, but it was about once a week or 2 or 3 times a month. They were part of a faith community, often part of a youth group. And they were of different faith traditions, but their families said, no, this is more important. So as parents, we race around. We go to cello lessons, and we go to SAT tutors. And I've spent 4 days in a basement in Cincinnati for a squash tournament, okay? But you know what? There's nowhere more important, because the spiritual core is the hub of the whole child.
Thank you so much. And I might encourage all of you in worship this morning during the piece, if you're in proximity to a young person, why don't you go and say, hi, what's your name? I'm so glad you're here today. Peace be with you. And if you're not in proximity during the piece, maybe after the service, find a young person, say hello to our fantastic youth preachers today, and tell them how much you support and value them and their presence here. I think you've spoken a bit about this already. I think you made a pretty good case for church, even if you might identify as atheist or agnostic. But would you like to say any more about how spirituality and the things that you're talking about can be applicable even to someone who might not be a traditionally professing Christian or Jew or Hindu person?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if we might go back, because I do love this picture. This is your natural spiritual brain. It is yours. No one can ever take it away from you. You were built to be in a deep, transcendent relationship. Now, how you understand or conceptualize of that is part of your journey. You're on a path, a quest. But this is your birthright. You are built to be in a deep, transcendent connection to the deeper, loving, guiding presence in life. And to feel that in our love for one another, the deep, abundant love that's in us, through us, and around us. So we looked all around the world. We looked in India, we looked in China, we looked in North America, and others have done the same at different points in life. We looked in adults, and we found that no matter where I live or no matter what tradition I may be from, or if I say I am spiritual but not religious, or I'm a humanist, I feel that ultimate reality is in how I treat fellow human beings. No matter where we are, there are 5 inborn phenotypes, ways of feeling and knowing our world, that are our birthright, right? This is our inborn spiritual awareness. And one is that love is not just a feeling. Love is a powerful, mutable force, like gravity or magnetism. And we are built to be in a deep connection with love. A few weeks ago, I visited His Holiness, the Dalai Lama in India. And no matter what metaphysical question I or my colleagues asked him, he came back with an answer, which is, you must love. You must love. The only way to a sustainable world, past our conflicts and through this transformation, is love. And it is not just a feeling. He said, To be there is a practice, a discipline, so that I might love someone if they don't love me back and they could right out disdain me. I can love them back. The second phenotype is that there is a unit of reality as well as a world of separateness. I say to my Columbia students, we are a point and we are a wave. We are magnificently diverse. We have different GPS coordinates and bio-body suits, and we're part of one source, one family of life, one sacred spirit, one field of consciousness. We are loved and we are one as much as we are distinct. Right? And that deep seed of awareness is built into our natural awakened brain. We all have that capacity to perceive. It's not a belief. It is ability to see it as reality because it's real. Right? The other three phenotypes are an on-ramp, a transcendent practice all around the world, meditation, prayer in many forms, to perceive the unitive reality of love, the unit of love. An off-ramp, a moral code by which I can live that out with my walk and hands. The unitive reality of love, a transcendent practice on-ramp, a moral code off-ramp, and finally, of all five phenotypes, the one that most correlates for our beautiful question with the strong awakened brain is altruism, your open door. When I serve and love God's children, fellow human beings, that is effectively prayer in action. That is living out the unit of love. And altruism, more than any of the phenotypes, is correlated with a strong, thick, awakened brain, our spiritual birthright, walking the walk. So to the very meaningful question, walking the walk is a profound spiritual act.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned the Dalai Lama.
Yes.
In the spirit of what we learned from Eastern traditions and this sense of unifying universal love, one person asks, can you speak about the concept of attachment and how the lack of attachment may relate to your ideas? And they add, what do you think is behind the decrease in attachment in our society?
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So I shared with you the first of two messages from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the second one is beautifully aligned with this question. We saw him 2 days. Day one was the message of love. Day two is the message that every human being suffers and every human being wants not to suffer. And why is it that we suffer? And in a very gracious but direct way, His Holiness said, in the West, there is a profound interest in the self. And it can be, it can be my money, my power, obvious, but it can also be, how do I feel about that? And what do I want today? And what really do I think of this? And he said, a lot of suffering is because of our Western tendency to be consumed with the self, and to be free of suffering is to take a deep interest in the plight of another. To really, I want to know you. I want to know your struggle. I want to support you. And while in the short run it can feel very satisfying to win the day in a deal, we want it by a landslide, or win the election, or win the money, whatever we win, that's a very short-lived perception. Because whether it's in 6 days or 6 years, to His Holiness it comes back on the other side. Or maybe it comes back to my kids or to His Holiness in another life. But it is, in a wider lens, it is only through a deep interest with one another that we can move beyond suffering. What this has to do with attachment is that we have right now, second to the pandemic of the diseases of despair, is a struggle with narcissism. And there's two types of narcissism. There's healthy narcissism, Rollo May talks about this, where I want to build up strength to serve, where I want to take what God's given me, realize it, to fulfill a calling. And then there's unhealthy narcissism, where the chronic world of measurement, where I wonder, am I bigger or littler compared to you? Do I have more or less money compared to you? Am I more or less famous compared to you? And that measuring stick, that chronic world of measurement, comes from a deep emptiness, right? And there's only one way to fill that abyss, because no matter how much I rack up in my world of measurement, tomorrow it's not enough if I look at you and you are bigger than me, right? And that hole, of course, is the God-sized hole. That is the realization of our deep, deep connection, our birthright, the transcendent, deeper, truer nature of life, the nature in life that is loving, holding, guiding, never leaves us alone. And so too we show up for one another, both forms of relational spirituality, to be loving, holding, guiding, and never leave anyone alone. Remember, altruism is a spiritual act. Those are, in The Awakened Brain, my next book, I show that there's different circuits that are built into our brain. Quite specifically, we partnered the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute at Columbia with our colleagues at Yale Medical School. We figured this out over 5 years. What are the neural circuits through which we receive and perceive the awareness that we are loved and held, guided, and never alone? And they're there. They're there for all of us. But that is the whole. And it's atrophy of the spiritual core that has led to the pandemic of suicide, the addictions, the suffering, but also the narcissism. And there's a way out of that. Radical interest in one another.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time, but we have time for a couple more questions. I was so struck by your reflections on how spiritual growth often finds its source in despair and struggle and suffering. That
Yes.
And it's so resonant with our Judeo-Christian traditions. Yes. You can't get to Easter without Good Friday. You can't get through to the Promised Land without going through the wilderness. At the same time, you talked a bit about grit and resilience. I'm wondering if you might reflect on the relationship between building up our resilience on the one hand and practicing self-care and wellness on the other. Something that we see in Gen Z and Gen Alpha is a great emphasis on self-care, sometimes to the criticism of those in previous generations.
Right, right. So it gets back to, who am I, really? And because you looked at me as a soul on earth and spoke of me as a child of God and prayed with me, that I know that I am a being of infinite worth, and so are you, and so is the person who's really annoying me at school. We're all a soul on earth. It's a different roadmap of reality, who we really are. And so there is a spiritual response. Mean Girls by the Locker. Where was she looking? Was she looking in your eye? Was she looking at your heart? Or was she looking at your body or your handbag? Where was she looking, right? And how can you tit for tat is not much of a way to live, right? That's a downward spiral. How can you choose love? Not be a victim, not be a doormat. Love yourself, love her. How do you choose love? How do you operationalize that? How do you walk that? Right? Yeah. So, are we getting to your question? Yeah. Say a bit more so I make sure I...
I'll bring it very close to home. My husband teaches Gen Z students at the college level. They seem to be under the impression that they can just declare a mental health day whenever they feel like it. Oh, I don't want to take this exam.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a mental health day, and
Yeah.
will you please move the exam to next week? And the answer is no. And sometimes he comes across as, a jerk because, well, don't you care about my wellness and my well-being and my self-care and my mental health? And the answer is yes, and we need you to be more resilient. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that kind of
Yes.
dynamic.
Yes. Okay, beautiful. God willing, the world will continue to grow and evolve and go through new chapters. But it is clearly the case that we're in transformative periods. So Gen Z and high schoolers and middle schoolers are going to enter a world with a lot of flux, a lot of dynamism, right? And you cannot hold on to external things. The train that took you from high school to college to a job that you could hold on to for 40 years, that's not there, right? So it's not through external things that we can find certainty and footing and clarity. It is through a deeper stance of quest. It is through what is life showing me now? What is God asking me now? It is through a deeply firm-footed stance of quest that life is a big, fantastic, sacred adventure. And my colleagues in Studio City say it is like a Star Wars. I would say it is a very sacred Star Wars. It is a deep, sacred adventure. And we don't know who's coming, and some of it hurts, and some of it feels good, and some of it's what we thought we wanted, and some is very much not what we thought we wanted. but it is a great sacred journey. It is not about getting what you thought you wanted, and the notion of manifesting what you thought you wanted is like shopping for life, right? Can I share with you a brief practice that is very helpful for young people? Could we do this? It's 90 seconds? Okay. I'd like to share this with you, and then invite you if you'd like to share it with someone you know. This is 90 seconds. I invite you to take 3 breaths. I invite you to think of a time where you wanted something so badly. You wanted that internship, that job, that apartment, him, her, them to say yes. You wanted it, and you did everything right. You researched it. You planned it. That red door was yours. A plus B plus C, you've done it right. You go for your red door, you grab the handle, but it's stuck. And you can't believe it's stuck because you've done A plus B plus C. You kick the door, you're shocked, that job, him, her, them, that no apartment, what? But only because that red door is stuck, you have no choice. You might be angry, you might be depressed. You must turn. You turn 40, you turn 60, you turn 100 degrees, and over there is a wide open, shining yellow door. You might have said yellow doors don't exist. What are yellow doors? And through the yellow door is someone that makes you feel alive, is a partner that you didn't even dream could exist, is a mentor that opened new directions for you, is a school that actually felt like home. The yellow door was not what you had wanted. It was better, and it was better for you. And as you think now, sitting here now, that yellow door that had so much to do with who you are and where you are today, was there anyone there at that hairpin turn when you turned 40, 100 degrees, who pointed you to the yellow door? A counselor, a grandparent, someone you met for 2 minutes at the coffee shop, on the bus, a trail angel, someone who showed up and said, have you ever thought of yellow doors? I want to tell you about yellow doors in my life. A trail angel. And as you sit way back, stuck red door, hairpin turn trail angel, and wide open yellow door that has so much to do with who you are and where you are today, how are the most important parts of our lives found? Sure, we have to research and prepare and do our work, but is it narrowly through radical control that the best parts of life are found? Are we narrowly makers of our path, or are we more profoundly discoverers on our journey? Are we perhaps an open system in dialogue with life, and finally sitting way back, where in your road of life is God? Where is your higher power? Is God in the open yellow door and the stuck red door? Is your higher power in the trail angel? Is God in the trail angel and your ability to be in open dialogue? Have you been on a spiritual path, a quest all along?
Amen. Thank you. Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. So the church bells are summoning us through the doors.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that was lovely, Zach.
Thank you so, so much.
Beautiful.
You started us off on a really important and rich conversation that I hope we can continue as time goes on. Thank you for joining us, and go in peace.
Thank you. Thank you very much.